Welcome to the Man Cave Podcast with Dan Casper.
He is Dr. Austin Crow, Chippewa Valley Orthopedics and Sports Medicine, joining us for our Inside the Training Room. First up, Doc, impressive, good win last week for Regis against Stanley Boyd. That was a heck of a game last week.
Oh, it was a doozy. I mean, Stanley came out strong. We took their first two shots when they scored back-to-back touchdowns, and then the team rallied, and it was a well-played game. Stanley is a great team. I think they're going to do some things in the postseason, but we were able to come out with the W. So I know it was really a big confidence booster for the guys, and it was definitely hard fought. So it was great to come away with a win.
Is it Neilsville Granton for you guys tonight?
Well, yeah, they actually just yesterday informed us they're gonna forfeit, so they weren't able to bring a healthy roster together. So they had a couple injuries last week, and so it turns out we kind of got a bonus bye week. So a little disappointing for the guys, but it is what it is. Obviously, if they can't bring a healthy team forward, you can't put them in a bad spot. So we have a bye week this week instead, and then we finish off the season playing a team out of Illinois, United Township, which is out of Molina in the Quad Cities. So it's a big school. So that's certainly going to be a test, so maybe we'll take a little extra time to prep for them.
Absolutely. So it'll be interesting. That'll be an interesting game to kind of watch, too, next week, an uncommon opponents over there.
Yeah, very much so, yeah. So we kind of had it. Osseo was not able to field a team this year, and so we had a spot we had to fill, and so it kind of was last minute. So they're a big school. I don't know. I can't know if they're the biggest or second biggest class in Illinois, but they're a big school. So I think their enrollment's around 1,800. So
wow,
heck of a lot bigger than Regis. So we're going to face up against a bigger opponent, but it might be a nice transition into the playoffs. Obviously, we want to make sure we stay healthy for that game, but beyond that, it should be hopefully a good tune-up for postseason play.
Absolutely. Good stuff here. Moving to, I should say, some injuries now. I want to ask you about Christian Watson. So he's been practicing. We've talked about him couple times. There was a report, high ankle sprain, but then he wasn't put on injured reserve, and he's been practicing this week. And now his dad apparently has been going, and his dad goes on Twitter a lot to argue with people. But he was arguing with, I guess, some Twitter doctors over there, and he said that his son Christian actually has a medial ankle sprain. Can you explain what that is, a medial ankle sprain?
Yeah, so medial ankle is the deltoid ligament. So when we talk about the ligament, there's three structures on the ankle that we look at. So we have the lateral ankle, which is the most common. So that's a group of actually three separate ones. The most commonly torn one is called the ATFL, the anterior talofibular ligament. So that's the classic. You roll your ankle, lateral sprain, quote, low ankle sprain, by far the most common. Second most common would be high ankle. And those are the ligaments that hold your tibia and your fibula together. That's generally a rotational injury. So it's not that you have a classic roll generally. Well, I think we all saw the video of what happened to Watson. That did look like a classic mechanism for a high ankle. So usually the foot's planted or stuck under something, and you get a rotation through the ankle and up into the knee, and that can basically rotate or pull apart the two bones. So that can be a pretty devastating injury. The least common, in generally it's not in isolation, so I'm guessing that the people arguing are probably both correct. Often the deltoid, which is the medial ligament on the ankle, or the one coming off the knob on the inner part of your ankle, that deltoid ligament, if that's injured, that's usually a rotational injury as well. Really uncommon to be done in isolation, so usually that happens in conjunction with a high ankle. And in fact, if you have a really significant injury to the high ankle and the medial ligament, usually that's an indication for surgery, which suggests that Watson's was a partial injury to those, because if he would have disrupted the deltoid and the high ankle, he would have gotten surgery almost for sure, and that's what we call a Mason-Neuve injury. So, yeah, it's a little bit complex, but when we think of the ankle, again, there's those three main areas, and that medial ankle is the least commonly injured, at least in isolation.
Gotcha. Interesting. There's been some groin injuries going on around here, too. I know Tucker Kraft, the tight end, was just added to the injury report with a groin injury yesterday. Jair's missed the last couple weeks because of a groin injury. Saw Rashad Bateman, the Ravens receiver, has been added to the injury report because of a groin. When it comes to groin injuries, are those like kind of what's the word I'm trying to come up here with? But like injuries that I know they're soft tissue injuries, but kind of I'm blanking on the word right now. That's kind of embarrassing right now. But fatigue injuries. That's what I was trying to think of, like a fatigue type of injury.
Well, I mean, all musculoskeletal injuries like that, I mean, they have increased risk in the setting of fatigue. So when people get to the point where their body's kind of at that limit, they're more prone to having those type of injuries. I'm not saying it's the only time they happen; they clearly don't, but we do see that. So, I mean, as you get through a season, there are times where you get kind of picked off because people are getting a little bit out of shape or tired, I should say. And so there is some correlation there, but I mean, I think it's one of those things. I mean, groin injuries just happen. You see it a lot in athletes that have, lateral movements, cutting, planting. It's not a classic like offensive lineman injury. It's more so guys that are shifty and moving, and so you get that kind of side-to-side cut, and it'll affect the groin. I mean, we use that term generically. Generally, a groin is referring to an adductor, but there is that kind of sports hernia portion of it as well, which is a little more nebulous. But in either event, generally they do respond well to conservative treatments, but they can take a while, and they can be injuries that nag for a while. So you get a guy who gets a groin injury in week 6, week 8, whatever, and all of a sudden come postseason, they're still kind of limping along with it. It can really be bothersome where they need a big block of time to rest it, and unfortunately you just can't do that in the middle of the football season. So there is that kind of element where you're kind of nursing those wounds along through the season, and we certainly can see that in this setting.
That's you mentioned the one injury there that made me nervous every time I hear groin injury is the sports hernia injury, because I mean that's surgery, but it seems like too, if you have that sports hernia surgery, it's not a season ender. It's only like a few weeks, right?
Yeah, and it depends on what's done. So I mean, there's plenty of debate on the right way to do it. Here's the crazy part. I mean, experts don't even fully agree on what it is. I mean, some people feel it's like a nerve issue. Some people feel it's like a microherniation. Some people feel it's a disruption of some of the tendons as they insert onto the pubic bone in the front. And so treatment, it can be, sometimes it's to repair a tendon, sometimes it's to do a neurectomy where they cut that nerve. I mean, so there's a lot of different things that people do for it, and they all seem to work about the same. So it's kind of, I think probably, in my opinion, it's probably multifactorial, so it may be a little bit of all the above, and that's why it's not one clear answer, because no one's completely right. But either way, that can be something that can really bother people. I mean, I think it first really gained popularity, at least in the attention of the media, is when Donovan McNabb had it. I think he might have missed the season back in the day with that, but that was kind of the first time I remember hearing about it, and I was like, what the heck is that? And then, you kind of look at it, and then now as I do this professionally, you kind of learn it's like, well, it's kind of a poorly understood topic. And so it's something that still people are looking at, and I don't think we have all the answers yet, but it's certainly treated much more efficiently now, but it's still something that can be bothersome and unfortunately does require surgery sometimes.
Your running back, Aaron Jones, left the game early on Sunday, and they're saying it's a hip injury, and it's week to week. When you hear a football player apparently suffering a hip injury, and it's kind of like day-to-day, week to week, what are some of the possibilities surrounding that?
Yeah, I mean, that it is a big question mark. I mean, I honestly, it's for something like that's that mild. I mean, if you had a real severe hip injury, like a subluxation dislocation or a fracture on, I mean, those are dramatic injuries, like the old Bo Jackson injury. Mm-hmm. I mean, those are season, potentially career-ending. So we know it wasn't anything like that. So then you're looking at more likely one of the tendons around the hip. So you have, your hip flexors, you have your abductors. Those are all muscles that are around that hip that can be injured. So my suspicion it's going to be more along those lines, so a tendon or musculotendinous injury. You could have something like an irritation with the labrum if he has a history of a labral problem. But often labral tears do go on to having surgery as well. So, I would guess it's going to be something along the lines of a tendon or musculotendinous injury, and it was relatively mild because it sounds like they're already kind of predicting him to be back after the bye week. So hopefully we can get him healthy and kind of move forward. And sounds like, the Vikings are going to have a couple new pieces back in the armamentarium after the bye week. So hopefully he'll be one of them.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. I know Nico Collins, the leading receiver in the league, he's out with a hamstring injury too, which I'm going to the game next week against Houston. So, on one hand, I'm glad he won't be tearing us apart over there. Yeah, no doubt about it. But I know we've talked about hamstring injuries a lot. My question is there degrees of hamstring injuries or pulls or strains or anything like that, like a grade 3, grade 2, and that?
Yep. You can get an MRI and measure them. I mean, we can have like a soft kind of subjective call, like when you assess them, like the severity. But if you MRI them, you can grade them on severity. But in the run of the mill, I mean, I get athletes that come in with a pulled hammy. I don't get an MRI. I mean, it doesn't really provide us a lot. Instead, we just do kind of like a week-by-week thing. The more severe ones are going to be, 4 to 6 weeks, if not longer. Mild ones can be a week or two. Pro athletes, of course, they sneeze and they get an MRI. So those guys have MRIs of everything, and so they'll know very clearly the severity, and they'll have a much better idea of how long that athlete will be out. But hammies, I mean, obviously you guys dealt with it with Watson last year, and I mean, every football team, every season across the world, there's always at least 1 or 2 guys in the team with a hammy. I mean, it's just such a common injury. And like we talked about, just like the groin, the problem is when they heal, that muscle heals with scar tissue, so it never gets exactly the same. And especially in the short term, you can get back, but it's always like in the back of your mind. I don't know if you've ever pulled a hammy, but I had one bad one in college. And I mean, for a good year or 2 years, I mean, every time I went into a full sprint, I could just feel it a little bit. Like it didn't re-pull, but you're like, I feel that, like it's there. And to this day, if I do certain lifts, I can still feel that hamstring spot. So they never go back to truly 100%, but they can get close. But yeah, it's never a good diagnosis when you see that. Obviously, there's worse ones that can be season-ending, but those are ones that, I mean, I can promise you Nico will know that from now till the end of the season that he has that bad hammy.
Finally, before I let you go, we know the type of surgery that Rashee Rice had, the Chiefs wide receiver. Apparently, he underwent successful LCL surgery in his right knee. Also, I had read too that he had a repair done to his hamstring tendon. Are those kind of common correlations between those two type of injuries? Do you think?
Yeah, we do see those. So he had probably what's called a posterior corner injury, and an injury to what's called the arcuate complex. So basically, on the lateral or outer part of the knee. Let me take one step back. So like when we talk about ligaments, like the MCL, ACL, PCL, they're often kind of referred relatively in isolation. The outside of the knee, or the LCL, really has kind of a group of structures that support it. So we call that collectively the posterolateral corner. And part of that is the LCL, which is pretty well known, the popliteus tendon, what's called the popliteofibular ligament, and then also your hamstring on that outer part, which is called the biceps femoris. So in a real significant, and we all saw the video of his knee getting hit by his own quarterback.
Yeah.
Bummer. His knee went in a way that's not normal. So what happened is I can guarantee you he avulsed that arcuate complex, which includes that biceps femoris. So the biceps femoris gets pulled off. So it's not often, but in fact, the last posterior corner I did on one of my patients, I had to fix the hamstring with it as well. So, I mean, they ripped that whole side off. So it's a pretty marked injury. And so that does explain a heck of a lot more as to what was going on. So isolated posterior corner injuries are fairly uncommon. Almost universally, they go along with ACLs and PCLs. And so if you remember in the news, they kept talking about, does he have an ACL? Does he have a PCL? And they didn't really mention the posterior corner. The assumption is from the get-go, the doctors were like, because that one's easy to tell. You take the leg and you put what's called a varus force, that'll blow wide open because the LCL and that whole corner is gone. So they knew that right away. The question was, how are the ACL and PCL? And that's where he got those opinions. Clearly, they felt that those were okay, which is great news for him. And they probably did either a repair or reconstruction. That side, you can sometimes do repairs, which can work very well. Sometimes we do reconstructions, and it depends on the injury pattern. But either way, that actually has a pretty good success rate. So hopefully he bounces back. It'll be a long recovery like all reconstructions, but he should do well. Interesting.
Wow. A lot of good stuff there. We appreciate the time as always, Austin. Enjoy the bye week. At least we don't have to see the Vikings win another game for me and over there. So I'm just...
Yeah, well, you know, it is what it is. One of my buddies who's a longtime listener has asked me to ask you, what are your thoughts on Bob Costas and his coverage on the Yankees? He's a little too biased with his play calling. Is your journalistic opinion on that?
Ooh, journalistic opinion might be a little too high of a praise. But I will say, yeah, you know, I'll say this. Even Hudson told him the other night to be quiet when we were watching that game. So that's my 7-year-old saying that guy's annoying right now. So
I mean, it's like you like it when people have that, a little bit of a take on a team, but sometimes it's hard to listen to when people are that kind of biased and
exactly
their angle, I guess. But
I would agree with your buddy too, and I think my 7-year-old Hudson agrees with him too. So good stuff, buddy. Hey, I appreciate the time as always, man. Enjoy the week, and we'll catch up with you again soon. Okay?